Welcome to the Money to the Masses podcast, putting you in control of your finances. It's a good thing podcasts are free, as this one isn't worth a penny. Here are your hosts, Damien Fay and Andy Leaks.
Now, Damien, before we get on with this week's podcast, you had something quickly to say about our sponsors.
Yeah, we've got a new sponsor, Money Farm, and Money Farm are an online investment advisor and one of the biggest digital wealth management companies in Europe. So a big thank you to them for sponsoring the podcast. Now, Money Farm create portfolios to maximise long-term returns using ETFs to make incredibly cheap portfolios. And you even get the first £10,000 of your portfolio invested without any charge from Money Farm. And if you enter the code MTTM20K into the box when you sign up, you get the first £20,000 of your portfolio invested and run by moneyfarm.com without any charge.
Great stuff. On with this week's show. Hello and welcome to episode 124 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fay, and me, Andy Leaks. Damien, welcome back.
It's good to be back, Andy. It's good to be back. How's your week been?
Yeah, it's been okay. It's been one of those weeks where you've just got to get through it, really. Quite busy at my day job, and also my youngest daughter's come down with the dreaded chicken pox, so always fun. So I'm sleeping in the spare room and all that kind of thing, really.
Oh, bless her. I mean, anybody who listens to this podcast, well, we've all had chicken pox at some point, but when it's your young children and you're trying to tell them not to scratch, that is you feel for them. So I feel for you, Andy, because I know what you're going through. And it's almost, they've all got to get it at some point, and there's never a perfect time, is there?
Never a perfect time, and there's all sorts. You know what it's like these days. You hear all these sorts of things, and you read up on the internet what's best for the children. Some mad people, and I call them mad people because they are mad people, take their children purposely to parties to make sure their children get chicken pox. And I kind of understand it because it just gets it out of the way and done. But for me, that's just madness because it's just putting your child at risk.
Do you know what I've heard of that? I was about to say the chicken pox party. It almost feels like an urban legend.
No, it happens. It definitely happens. And I mean, each to their own. Everyone can, parent however they wish. But for me, to deliberately go out and give your child an illness, it just doesn't sit right with me. But there we go.
I'm with you, Andy.
Hey, I've learned something new as well this week, Damien. Apparently, you can bath your children in porridge oats. You can basically give them a porridge bath, and it takes the itching away. So, don't do it on my recommendation. Read up on it first, because it might not be right for your child. But it's certainly, it's. I'll caveat that. I don't want to be getting some nasty letters next week. But letters. Where am I? I'm going back to
the dark ages. Actually, Andy, we do get emails. So we do, and we had one this week, didn't we, from a listener to you?
Yeah.
Which you can tell the story, because it actually follows on from was it last week or a couple of weeks ago? We were talking about energy saving and changing our utility bills, and you tell the story.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago we talked about a couple of different ways of attacking your energy bills. We talked about a company called Flipper, and at that point I said to you, look, I still haven't done this. I need to do it. I've had my statement through. I'm paying too much. I need to do it. Anyway, roll on a couple of weeks and I still hadn't done it, and I got a lovely email forwarded on from yourself. It was a crazy time as well. Gone midnight. Damien, you worked too late, and it basically said, consider Andy prodded, and I thought, what's going on here? This is a bit strange. Read down the email stream, and a kind listener, I think his name was Rob, got in touch to say, Damien, please can you prod Andy? I've just used Flipper on your say-so, and they were brilliant. Took 10 minutes, and I've saved over £500, I think it was, in a year, and I'm not looking back. So get Andy to do it. And I think it was yesterday or the day before, I did it. And I have to say, it was brilliant. 10 minutes, and really quite pleased with the service, I'll be honest.
So you flipped this week, Andy?
I flipped. Finally, yeah. I flipped. Although I didn't flip, because they then sent me a kind email to say, we can't do anything until you've paid off your current bill. The way I do my I don't do mine by direct debit, which is very, very naughty. You should do really to get the maximum savings. But I was badly treated by an old provider, and they kept sneakily upping my monthly direct debits without me knowing. And when I went to leave them, they owed me over £500, and I thought, I'm not letting that happen again. So at the moment, what I do is I send quarterly accurate readings and then pay it off quarterly. It's not the cheapest way of doing it, but it does at least mean that I don't end up having to chase them for money back. But doing it the new Flipper way, I am going to do it on monthly direct debit because it is the cheapest way to do things in terms of the tariffs you can get.
Well, while you've been more conscientious, I've been frivolous this week because I went to Cheltenham Horse Racing Festival for a day, and as Andy will know, I don't really know the sort of front from the back of a horse, and to go down there and I mean, I quite revel in the fact of knowing nothing about something like horse racing. I just go down there for the day. So I went down there on the first day of the Cheltenham Horse Racing and gambled some money with the bookies, which I just see it as money that just I'm never going to get back. Although I did pick one winner, which meant that I was still down. Who isn't? But it at least gave me the adrenaline buzz that I felt that I knew something about horse racing, which I evidently know nothing about.
Did you do your bets with the dodgy guys on track that sort of stand on a box and have a big blackboard and
you've got
to touch their heads and noses and
you've got to, because the thing is that people, I'm not a hardened gambler by any stretch. I don't really gamble that much, but the best value if you're gambling often is on the exchanges, so things like Betfair and stuff like that, where you can back and lay. And if you're going to go down to a horse race meeting and then just do it online, it kind of defeats the object. You might as well just stay at home, I think, because you actually get a better view anyway, because you can actually follow the horses all the way around, because Cheltenham's quite good. It's very open. It's like a bowl, isn't it? But you still can't see the horses for most of it. You are still watching the race on a massive screen. So you only you get the atmosphere, the real atmosphere, but you're still watching a lot of it on the TV. So I just feel that when in Rome, you've got to get down with what's going on and, pretend you know what you're doing. And so,
Yeah, fair play to you. Do you know, I've only been to the racing once. I went to watch the Derby, and I found it as fascinating watching those guys as I did actually watching the horses themselves, because you're watching someone's, livelihood play out in front of you, and you can see from their faces, on in terms of what horses are winning and what sort of a day they're having, whether they're up or down. And I kind of feel for them in a way. I mean, you do get the odd ones that have a real smug grin when they're absolutely rinsing everyone on the racetrack. But when they're having a bad day, I kind of feel sorry for them. I know I shouldn't, because they're in that game for a reason and they're taking their own risks. But
you never see a poor bookie, as the old phrase goes. But you know what? Before we move on, that is one thing at one point I always wanted to be. It fascinates me. Being a bookie, and it's the mathematics behind the whole thing fascinates me. And I had my calling not been what I do now, I could have ended up being a bookie. But anyway,
you could always do a very similar thing that's not quite gambling, and that's becoming an actuary. Did that ever interest you?
Yeah.
Because it's kind of the same thing. You're looking at risk, aren't you? And you're balancing the book.
Well, that's what I did. That's what I did become. I did. I started my career after I left university, studying to be one, and after a number of years, I found it to be way too
boring.
I found, exactly. I'll probably insult a lot of people, but actuaries are. If you think accountancy's boring, then you should go and try and be an actuary. And I decided to do something different. Anyway, let's get back on with the money stuff, Andy. We've been talking for 5 minutes about our weeks, but I'm going to cover a few things this week. One of them is another money-saving thing, actually, on Sky TV, which I saw in the... it's something I wasn't aware of, but I knew that you could do this with other services. So I'm going to give you a quick, easy way, without ringing up, because obviously we all know you can haggle with Sky to argue over your TV pricing, but you can be even lazier than that and knock nearly £140 off your Sky bill a year. I also want to talk about investment fund lists, because we're getting to the end of the tax year. So what you're going to start seeing is all those of you who invest, you're going to get lots of fund platforms. So the people you buy your investments through, sending you glossy brochures and things dressed up as research with their fund lists on. And I got asked a brilliant question via 8020 Investor, and I'm going to touch upon it. I'm not going to give you all of what I said, but I'm going to touch upon it and give people some valuable insights into the world of marketing and investment research that they will be experiencing. And I'm going to just quickly touch upon something to do with interest rates as well.
Beautiful. Okay, so what should we do first? Should we save the money saving bit for the end? Keep people tuned in for the Sky tips? Or?
Yeah, let's do that. No, Andy, we'll leave it at that because I want to do a quick piece on. I've been doing a lot this week about interest rates, and it's not about interest rates in this country. It was actually in the US, because I don't know if you people realise out there that we've got historically low interest rates, and globally that happened, didn't it? When we had the banking crisis and the financial crisis, all the central banks in the world hit the panic button to try and keep our economies going and to stop the finance system collapsing. So what they did is they cut interest rates to incredibly low rates, low levels, and started printing lots of money. Now, we're at the point, it's a bit like a patient who's incredibly sick and has gone into a coma and they're pumping them full of drugs. They're now trying to get to the point that hopefully the patient can sustain themselves and come off life support. So the idea is that in America, they are starting doing what they call the tightening process of interest rates, where they're starting to raise them. So this week was a big week in terms of whether what is the US Federal Reserve, so that's the equivalent of our Bank of England, we're going to raise interest rates. So it's kind of a general theme I want to talk about, because I don't like to date podcasts. So it's about this idea of what happens when you raise interest rates, in particular with the stock market, because I was asked this week by somebody, and I thought it was an interesting piece just to quickly run through. And the idea is that do you remember I bring up almost feel like every week, Andy, my analogy of watering the garden with low interest rates and stuff like that. So when they cut rates and they flood the market with money, it all runs off into the sort of on the parched land, and it goes into areas that forms puddles. Basically, things like the stock market goes through the roof because all the money finds itself into risky assets. Now, what happens when the central banks start doing the opposite, so they start trying to raise interest rates, is quite interesting, because there are people, the jury is out, because we've had periods in the past where we've started to raise interest rates, and the general thinking is that if you're going to raise interest rates, then the stock market is going to turn south. It's going to maybe not collapse, but it will basically start to fall. It's bad for the stock market if interest rates go up. And the more you look into it, the more the research seems to suggest all different things, and there doesn't seem to be a one, like lots of things in money. The answer changes depending on which day you ask the economist, but the idea is that was generally pushed out there, that if interest rates start going up generally in the economy, then stock markets will start to tumble. But I just wanted to point out to people that they don't need to panic necessarily because it looks like interest rates are starting to go up in America, because it's not necessarily about the rates going up, it's about the pace of which they will do in the future that people are concerned about. And research has shown that when they start increasing interest rates, it's not necessarily a cause for stock markets in the past to collapse and sell off, because we're on a big equity rally at the moment, and it isn't guaranteed that it will start to turn south straight away. And part of the reason is the reasons why they increase interest rates. So if the central banks increase them because the economy is starting to sort of heat up a bit and it's going along nicely, and to stimulate things, then and to keep things ticking along, then that's great. A bit like when you're driving along in your car and you start changing up gears and the engine's revs are going up, just to keep the things trundling along, that's great. It's the point, it seems, when the reason they're hiking interest rates is to control inflation, which is what they're doing. A bit like when you put your foot on the accelerator in a car and your rev counter goes through the roof, you move the gear stick up, so change rates up to stop it blowing up. And it's at that point, if they get into that cycle, that it's bad for the stock market. So we don't seem to be there yet. So it's when they're worried about inflation, it's when they're worried about the economy overheating, so it's really growing so fast, they're trying to restrain it and trying to calm things down. That's when it actually then just sends the stock market over a cliff and it can send it downwards. So the upshot of that, to sum up, is that it's not necessarily bad news. We don't have to run for the hills, but there are some trends that if you look back, that if we are going to start entering a rate tightening cycle, and in the UK at the moment we're still at historic lows, although just as we almost speak, the Bank of England just had a rate set meeting, and they kept rates on there at their historic low. But one of the people on the committee started sticking their hand up, saying they wanted to raise interest rates. So there's a split. Before, all 9 people on the committee, because the majority vote, was saying no, leave them as they are. Now one person's starting to veer off, and that might start seeing or suggesting that we could, in time, we're going to start getting pressures to raise rates over here. And so the other historic trends, when rates go up, it tends to be bad for UK equities, not so much for US for some reason. It tends to be good for momentum. So if you're using momentum to invest in the US, it's not so great for the UK. So we're actually in a bit of a sweet spot if the US are hiking and the UK isn't for momentum, which is obviously great news for people who are doing things like momentum investing, in 80-20 investor. It also is good for when rates go up, defensive stocks tend to do better. So that means things like utilities and energy stuff, energy companies, because when rates go up, it tends to cause people to maybe spend less if their mortgage rates go up. So therefore, it means they buy less clothes, so things like retailers start to do poorly. So anything that's economically sensitive, companies in those sectors tend to do relatively less well, or do worse, when interest rates start to go up. And that's just because when interest rates are going up, it's because the central banks in whichever country is moving their rates up is trying to cool things down in the economy. So it's those economically sensitive sectors that tend to underperform. So that was just a quick roundup, really, Andy, just for people out there, because I was asked the question, is this the end of the equity rally? I mean, I have no idea whether it is or not. It doesn't have to be, but there are these general trends. If we're going to start getting into the world of interest rate hikes, it's things to be aware of.
Good. No, interesting stuff. I did sort of catch the tail end of that news in the US, and I'll be honest, I did wonder how it would affect us, and you've answered it pretty much bang on for what I wanted to know. So good stuff. Okay, what have we got next?
Right, the one thing I wanted to talk about now is fund lists. Okay, now for this, it's particularly relevant this time of year, but it is relevant any other time. When you invest, so you might invest through the likes of Hargreaves Lansdown, it might be Fidelity, or any number of platforms that are out there. They all tend to have what is called a fund list, so it's like their best buy. Now, I got a question. I'm not going to name the platform that was named in the question from an 80-20 investor, but they were slightly bemused by the fact that this particular platform had sent out a piece of research, and if you could see me now, Andy, I'm doing that really annoying inverted comma things with my hands that says research, about a series of funds, and a particular fund was not mentioned in their best buy list. Now, I'll say the fund. It's called Fund Smith Equity. There's a guy called Terry Smith who's a fund manager who's done really quite well in recent years since he launched his fund. He's quite outspoken, and his fund was not in the best buy list because he didn't have a decent enough track record. But Neil Woodford, who we've mentioned in the past, who people liken to some sort of demigod in terms of investing, was in the research, and he's just launching a new fund, and they're all saying buy this fund, which therefore doesn't make sense. How can a fund that's outperformed and done brilliantly, such as for a number of years, which was the Fundsmith fund, they're saying don't touch it, but something like Neil Woodford, when he creates a fund in an area that he's not really been investing in before, that's suddenly a buy. Now that, they wanted me to sort of square that off, and the upshot is, this person found the point at which supposed research is actually marketing. And the way you've got to think about it, that investment platforms make money from you by facilitating you buying their investments. They take a small percentage of what you've got on the platform. Some actually make funds as well, so they get a double whammy from you. So they get money from the AMC on the fund that's theirs. But most don't have funds, so they'll just get a cut of the assets you've got under their roof. And of course, what happens when they do these best buy lists, a lot of these companies will have funds on there. A lot of them may be good funds, but what they'll also try and do is they'll know if they're particularly big platforms that money will flow into them. And as soon as they will recommend this fund on their best buy, then money will fly into these funds. The fund managers know this. It's why they want to be on their best buy lists. And so the idea of being on their list purely based on research is a nice one, but it doesn't always occur. And Terry Smith, actually, a number of years ago, called out a fund platform. I don't know whether I should say it or not, but it is in the public domain. So he did. I might as well name it. I don't think I'm not going to get sued. But he called out Hargreaves Lansdown, and he suggested that he wouldn't cut his charges his AMC, give them a bigger slice of it to be on their best buy list. So what he was suggesting is, effectively, in not too many words, if you join the dots, that he was almost having to pay to be on the list, on their best buy list. Now, what I want people to take from that is that, generally speaking, the fund lists on these platforms are marketing ploys rather than as much more marketing than research. There are some fantastic funds on there, don't get me wrong, there really are, and they would have negotiated some great deals for investors, but there is a point whereby they have to weigh up the idea of how much money they're going to make from a launch of someone like Neil Woodford's fund, because let's be honest, it's a bit like a rock star who releases an album. It doesn't matter whether it's any good or not, people are going to buy it. They're going to realise that, and there's millions to be made from facilitating the buying of that fund. So therefore, it makes sense for him to appear on their best buy lists, and they can use his previous record in other funds as a reason to buy it. So there comes a case where the marketing, research people in these fund platforms and the guys on the commercials have to make a decision, and I think that's the point where sometimes it can become slightly clouded and people become mistrusting of them, quite rightly on occasion. So the upshot is, perhaps I've just lifted the curtain slightly, that people will realise that there are occasions where marketing creeps into some of these fund lists, and therefore by all means look at them. Primarily what you should do is take out a subscription to my 80/20 investor service, of course, if you want to find out which funds to invest in. But that's not the reason why I'm just telling you what happens with these fund lists. And they are largely a marketing stroke research function. So take them with a pinch of salt. By all means use them, but don't bet the house on them, because they also don't change them very often. And part of the reason they don't change them very often because they'd have to reprint things, renegotiate deals. But another reason is, don't forget, platforms and fund managers make money from you by you having your money in their fund for the long term. They don't want you to keep switching around because they don't make money from you in doing it. So what I would say, these platforms out there are brilliant. They are great vehicles for buying investments, especially with the competition now driving down prices. So they are great. So by all means, use them, invest your money, but you don't always have to take their recommendations sometimes with a pinch of salt. And I liken it to, if you, Andy, were going to go around Tesco's and Tesco's were going to tell you what you should eat for dinner that day, you'd probably take exception to it, particularly when they were selling you something that was probably their most expensive meal or something in the whole supermarket. Or like if you went to a restaurant and the waiter said, oh, this is the best thing in there, and he picks the expensive steak, you're going to sit there and look at that and think, is it really?
Yeah, ironically, I'd take it with a pinch of salt, which with Tesco is something you often don't need because there's already enough in there. But yeah. No, absolutely.
So that's my tip for this ISA season, because I've done a lot actually in the last week or two where I've been journalists asking me for fund tips. Actually, before we move on, Andy, I just want to mention something on that, because there was a follow-up question that someone said, well, can we even believe anything we read in the papers, for example, from these commentators? And I want to give you a bit of insight into that, because the answer is, again, take it with a pinch of salt. Now, you might turn around and say, well, yeah, but you're in there, Damien. Now, anything I say, I would generally write about is because I generally believe it, and it's a true opinion, and there's no ulterior motive. Now, I'm going to give you a bit of insight, because some of the people who are regular contributors to these columns that you might see in articles that I'm quoted in, they also run investment businesses. They now may be financial advisors, wealth managers, or part of a platform. Now, just ponder this. They will have for their clients some funds that they really, really like. For whatever reason they choose that fund, a lot of their clients will have been put into a particular fund. Now, will they go out in the national press and recommend something different or not to be in that fund? Because what do you think would happen if they did? What would happen is the next day their phones would ring hot, because every client would ring up and go, what am I doing? You've just been in the Telegraph or the Times saying not to be in this fund or not to invest in bonds, and we're all investing in bonds, what's going on? So I know this for a fact happens. This isn't me making this up. I know that some of these comments are made bearing in mind what's going on in their own businesses. So that is true of, I think, a lot of different industries. There's obviously self-interest, so you have to rein in what they're saying, because obviously they don't want a PR disaster for themselves. So I would say definitely don't believe anything you read in the paper that these people say, these analysts. Some are better than others, but generally speaking, I would always, goes back to a podcast we did a long time ago now, probably about a year ago, which if you look for the titles, it was How to Read the Money Pages. And go back and listen to it, because we explained how to do it, didn't we, Andy? And part of the...
You did. It's very interesting, actually.
Part of it is down to, you've got to question the motive of anybody who's given a quote. Every story that's in the press normally has a motive behind the person who is the key spokesperson within the press piece, because a lot of ideas for the press come from not their own heads, not the journalists' own heads, but external people trying to pitch ideas which has which is beneficial to them. And so they have go-to people who they quote, and those go-to people again have their own motives. So there you go. It's me just lifting the lid on some of that. And some people again mentioned about fund ratings. There are rating agencies. Again, there are people who call into question the independence of some of these rating agencies, because there are money changes hands for being able to put some of their ratings on the fund houses marketing. So if you're paying money at any point for something and it's exchanging hands, then I think that always calls into question the independence and things. Even if they are, it just muddies the water. And I know for a fact that there have been fund managers out there that when they get to, because 3 years is a key point in fund management, 3 years is the point where rating agencies might give them a rating, and other people in the industry will take a fund seriously. And it's not unknown for somebody to step the foot off the gas a little bit if they're doing particularly well when they're getting near that 3 year mark, because they want their fund to still have be outperforming. So they might just benchmark hug for a little bit before they carry on with what they were doing, because they don't want to suddenly lose that outperformance. But there you go, that's just the truth of the matter. Before we move on, Andy, I just wanted to quickly mention 80/20 Investor. Now, 80/20 Investor is my DIY investment service. Do go and check it out. I empower and teach people how to invest their own money. The service provides data-driven fund tables. The data is driven by my own unique 80/20 Investor algorithm, which I created. You also get stop-loss alerts, you get research articles and insights, you get market commentaries, monthly commentaries, and DIY investment lessons, but you also get access to my £50,000 portfolio, which is a portfolio of my own money, which I run live on the site for members to see, and it shows people how I use the service to maximise my returns. And in the first 2 years of doing so, I turned £50,000 into £59,500, which is a 19% return, beating investment managers, professional fund managers, financial advisors, investment banks, passive trackers in the market. So everybody can have a free 30-day trial of 80/20 Investor, and you can claim that by going to moneytothemasses.com and going and clicking on the 80/20 Investor hyperlink at the top of the page. So go and try the service. Let me know what you think of it, and I know from the feedback that you're going to love it. But for now, on with the show.
Okay, Damien, you're going to save me money on my Sky TV package. Tell me more.
Yeah, but Andy, if it's anything like what happened with the flipper thing, you'll just ignore it anyway. But I have to say, I'm not the best at doing things like this. But apparently, we all probably know by now that if you ring up some companies and say, I'm going to leave, I'm leaving you, and then they beg you not to, and then they give you some offer and discount your subscription. Sky are particularly good, bad, whichever way you want to look at it, at doing this, because I've done it in the past and reduced my subscriptions down, and they give you offers. And most services do it to a certain point, but there's that painful element where you've got to play this game where you ring them up and then they try and sell you to you, don't they? And they keep going round and round, and then when you say, no, I'm leaving, and then they go, right, we'll transfer you to the whatever service, like the customer retention or whatever it is, and then you go on hold again, and then you end up going to the person and play the same game, and eventually they give you a deal, or you argue about a deal, and you can take you half an hour of your day just to do that. And that's why people don't bother, and they know that, they delay the whole thing. But apparently there are ways in which, for example on Sky TV, which you can do this by sitting in your armchair or online. And it was in one of the newspapers, actually. I will name check it. It was the Mirror, actually, who did it, and they got a money saving section, and they published an article which showed that you could actually save £139.20 on your Sky subscription. And the way you do it is quite simply, you log into your Sky account online, so go to sky.com, and then if you if you go to the bottom of the page, you'll find a link to a thinking of leaving page. And so you go through to that page, and then at the bottom of that, there is a subheading that says something like still looking to cancel. And then you click on the Sky TV option underneath, and then it will give you some discounts you're eligible for, which to me does... I know no one's going to give you money for nothing, are they? They're not going to just reduce your bills. But it does feel like if you go through, you get some discounts here. There you go. Now you're trying to leave us, you can have them. And there's usually some form of questionnaire page or something like that. And when you go through, if it asks you why you're going to leave, then you have to say you're worried about the cost. And if you are eligible, then you will probably be directed to a page that gives you as much as a 20% discount on your Sky subscription. And there are terms and conditions to this. I mean, one of the big things you have to realise is that if you say, yes, brilliant, I've saved 20%, they will sign you up to another, at least a year contract. Because if you kind of come out of your contract, not everybody will be eligible for these discounts. Don't forget, if you've already got discounts, they're not going to give you another one. So bear that in mind, and bear in mind that you are going to be signing up for another year, which means that you won't be able to move around. But if you're sitting there listening to this on your way to work, try it on your phone. You probably need to be on a desktop, so try it when you get into work. Then you could save up to £140 on your Sky bill.
Very good. So you can do that all online without speaking to a human being. How amazing is that?
Yeah, well, some of us don't like speaking to human beings or call centres, I think, but they just delay you, Andy. I know what it's like. They delay you. Or you go on one of those remote chat things and you go round and round in circles as well. But there you go. For anybody who's listened to this podcast, by the way, who is pondering, I remember 2 weeks ago I mentioned about this amazing new podcast that I am doing, about to launch, called One Giant Leap. And Andy is skillfully editing and turning it into a piece of art. It's imminent. And I'm going to... The reason I say that is because when we launch these things, iTunes, it's just the way of the world, takes a while to get it up online. So as soon as it is, which will likely be in the next few days, I will tell you all how you can go and subscribe to it, where you can find it. And I've done an introductory episode which gives you the full lowdown on what to expect from the podcast, why I'm doing it, and why I'm the person to be doing it, and tease things up for the upcoming interview. So do keep an ear out for that, because I really want you all to subscribe to it. And this podcast has been amazing, hasn't it, Andy? The success we're having now, and it's getting bigger and bigger. Please do share it around. We're getting emails and reviews all the time. Keep the reviews coming. I mean, they really help us on iTunes and push us up the ranking and get even more listeners. So, but we're just giving you another thing to love and listen to, maybe on the way home from work, or you listen to this current podcast on the way too.
Beautiful. Very well said. Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, what else have we got? We're done.
We're done, Andy. We are done.
So you can get in touch with Damien the normal way, damien@moneytothemasses.com, or if you prefer, podcast@moneytothemasses.com. That will still get through to us. Also, Damien is on Twitter. He loves answering your questions by Twitter. Really simple to get hold of Damien in that way too. It's @moneytothemasses with the number 2. And Damien might well be answering that while he's on the toilet.
It probably is. As a crone sufferer, Andy, I always tell people this. There's a very good chance I will be.
Good. Right, until next week.
Until next week, Andy.
Don't forget to claim your free copy of Damien's best-selling book, The 30-Day Money Plan. Sort your finances in just 5 minutes a day, worth $4.99. Just go to moneytothemasses.com/podcast to find out how.